Welcome back to Session 2, Part 2, Biomarkers of Memory, Clues from Your Body that Tell Us About Your Brain. So this is the application phase. We're going to look at things that we can investigate or analyze that can tell us about how our brain is working. And these are things that like smell and balance that we've talked about already, that you can look at home. Now, we're not going to be able to pull some of the accurate numbers that we can with some of the more advanced diagnostic equipment that we would have in a facility like ours, but these are things you can look at an entry level to say, hey, am I having some problems with my ability to stand on one leg, or am I having some problems with my smell? And this might be indicating that there are some underlying issues that need to be addressed. So this is the application phase, Part 2. And I like to start by reflecting on this particular statement by the father of modern neuroscience. Again, one of my favorite quotes. We've talked about this, and I always love to refer back to it. But everyone can, if they so desire, become the sculptor of their own brain. That's how I like to paraphrase that. But we can, if we have the appropriate information, if we have the appropriate resources, if we have the appropriate drive and desire and motivation to change, we can, in fact, change. That's what this series is all about, and that's what we're looking to do in these application phases of training. So here we go. What can you do? That's the big question, and the good news is there's a lot that you can do, much more than we can tap into in this short 6-week series, but we're going to do our best to cover as much ground as we can and show you a lot of what you can do to, in fact, help yourself build a better brain. So smell. We talked about smell being the canary in the coal mine. So how can we measure smell? We can do this really quite accurately. The thing is, it does require 2 people, so you will need 2 people to do this particular test. And it is something that can really, show us if we're possibly at some early stages of cognitive impairment, or if there is cognitive impairment, how progressive might that be? We talked about some of those statistics before. So we want to ensure first that the person being tested, that their nasal passages are clear and that there are no competing smells in the room. Last thing you want to do is try to test somebody's smell if somebody's cooking bacon in the background or something like that. We, in an office setting, we generally have a very neutral environment as far as smell goes, so it's very easy to test. But if you're in the home, you want to make sure you get to at least a room where there is no competing smells. And again, nasal passages need to be clear, and understand too that if you or the person being tested has some type of asthma, allergies, some type of damage to the first cranial nerve, the olfactory nerve, other issues, that there might be challenges with smell that have nothing to do with cognitive impairment. But for the average person who has had a decent sense of smell their entire life and no damage to those systems, decreased in smell under these testing situations can tell us about something. Now, when you're using both nostrils, it's easier to smell, so we're going to separate them one from the other, and that's the key, because we have people all the time telling us that they smell just fine. They smell perfectly, there's no problem, they taste everything just fine, but when we isolate, we can see that they have actually significant challenges with their ability to smell. And then there's also the aspect of how well do they identify the particular substance. So here we go. Each nostril will be tested separately. So this will be occluding one nostril or having one nostril being tested at a time. And during the test, the eyes will be closed just so the individual doesn't know what it is that you're trying to test them with. So you want to use common smells, things like coffee, peppermint, orange, things that people can easily identify. When you get into things like lavender and others, some people just simply don't know those smells and they're more difficult. But things like coffee, peppermint, orange, they are generally stronger smells. If you use essential oils, they're much more concentrated and can really help assist, and they're in smaller containers, so they can really help assist this type of testing. So you want to use them in sealed containers until you're ready to test, because if the container is open, it's going to be getting around the room and it will impair the results of the test. So what you do is, and there will be a video on this at some point that we will put up in the members only section. It'll be a 1 or 2 minute video that will show this exact procedure, but these step-by-step guidelines should get you there with this particular type of test. It's not a hard test. It just takes a little bit of doing it once or twice to get it down. So what you do is you take a ruler, a regular 12-inch ruler, and you put the 0 part by the nose and the 12-inch part down in front of the person. And what you want to do is you want to bring the smell progressively closer to the nose until it is perceived. So I tell people all the time, number one, tell me as soon as you smell it, and that's where you measure. And then number two, identify it as quickly as you can. That's the key. So they need to smell it and they need to identify it. And that will be up in just a moment. But as soon as they smell it, they need to either raise their hand or tell you, and that's where you stop moving it and you just measure where that is. It might be at 5 inches, it might be at 12 inches, it might be at 0 inches. So you need that first perception, need them to let you know when they smell that. So they should be able to smell and identify accurately at about 8 to 10 inches. Now this will vary significantly in people, but there are folks, again, like I've talked about, that say they have good smell, and next thing you know, about an inch away from their nostril and they're still not smelling something. Or they simply do smell it and can't identify it. So that's a challenge. We need accurate perception and accurate identification. We need both to ensure that the brain is working well. You do not want to open your eyes or unplug a nostril until the smell is identified, because if somebody smells it and they tell you they smell it and then they pull their finger away, now both nostrils working together will more accurately identify that smell, and you don't want that. You want them to try to identify it through one nostril and one nostril only. So once you've done all that, write the information down, go ahead and repeat the other side and see what you come up with. So pretty straightforward, just run through it a couple of times and you'll get the hang of it. Come back, listen to this again, read the instructions here, and we will have a video on it at some point. And then there are much more accurate smell tests that will have very specific quantities of a substance, these smell identification tests that will basically go through different ranges of smells and can really get us a great deal of information. But for our purposes, this is a really, really good test to assess what's going on in the brain with regard to that smell system and related memory systems. Also, too, you can self-test this in a way. You can have 2 or 3 different bottles of essential oils and make sure they're the same shape and size. And you can simply mix them up a little bit with your eyes closed. Then you can plug one nostril and just unscrew the cap and bring it closer to your nose. And what you're going to do is just notice the distance where it is. You can't hold the ruler and do all of that I just described at the same time. But you can get a general sense if you are smelling things or if you have to bring it all the way up to your nose to smell it. But always better done with 2 people and always done better with a provider experienced in doing these types of tests. Okay, sit to stand. This is a big one right here. I really like this one a lot because most people think, hey, piece of cake, I can do this. Well, many people do have impairments of this, particularly as people are getting over the age of 55 or 60 or so. They have significant challenges with these types of tests. So we want to understand that it can be used as an assessment, but also too as a method of intervention. So you want to sit centered in a regular chair, so you don't want to be on a swivel chair or cushion chair or anything like that. So these wooden dining room chairs with no arms are the ideal chairs to use for this type of test. And what you do is you sit centered in that chair, not resting against the backrest, but sitting upright in that chair. And your feet will be shoulder width apart. You can have one foot slightly in front of the other if needed. So if you do have some knee problems or hip problems or something like that, you can put one foot slightly in front of the other, so it makes it a little bit easier. Your arms, as in the picture here, your arms are to your chest and the wrists are crossed. So you have an X right across your chest. What you want to do is first you want to rise. Most people, when prompted to do this, they will rock their weight forward and rise quickly. That's good. We want to see if that can happen. Now we want to see it done on the second time. We want to see it done more controlled. So we want to see people actually shift their weight slowly and try to use the pressure downward on their feet to push themselves up, and note the difference between the two, because a lot of people can compensate or fake it, so to speak, by rocking their weight forward quickly to get up. Once we slow it down, we can really see true deficits arise, and this is really important. So if assistance is needed on this particular test, that means if they have to put their hand down or put their hand on their knees or something like that, the score is 0, it's an invalid test, and it indicates a decreased level of general fitness that needs to be addressed, because we understand tests like this are directly related to levels of cognitive function. So if somebody's having trouble getting up in and out of a chair, there's undoubtedly some type of cognitive impairment, even if mild. And again, there are reasons people can't get out of a chair if they have hip problems, back problems, but we need to rule those out before doing this type of test. Balance. So it takes balance sitting to standing, right? We have to get centered, we have to get our weight above a certain point to be able to push down into our feet and get our body upright. And that takes a good balance system, which takes a good brain. So balance, we can look at balance many different ways, but simple ways to check at home. And I always say, this should be done in a safe environment to avoid injuries. So you don't want to go ahead and start doing tests like standing on one leg if you have any balance problems or even physical ailments that might cause you to lose your balance. So blood pressure issues, joint issues, etc. So we want to be really careful with these exercises, exercise caution, be in a safe area next to a bed or a couch or a chair where you can catch yourself if needed. Kitchen counter, people can do them where they have their hands on the counter and they're just essentially keeping balance if they do fall off a little bit. So you want to start with the feet together. And if people do have stability issues, they can stand with their feet shoulder width apart. Now that starts to indicate that there are some problems. If people have to stand with their feet shoulder width apart with their eyes open, that's a challenge. That indicates a system that's not working so well. So our feet together, you don't want the feet touching though. You want your arms at your side, and we're going to test eyes open and eyes closed. So people should be able to stand easily for 30 seconds with their feet together, with their eyes open in particular, and also with their eyes closed. Now with the eyes closed, you want to have somebody around you. Again, all testing should be done in a safe environment to avoid injury. So you want to have somebody around you to assess this, because you may not know you're going until it's too, you may not know you're falling over or going to the side until it's too late to catch yourself, and we don't want anybody getting hurt doing this. So I can't stress that enough. Have somebody with you and make sure that they're keeping a good solid eye on you, and even having their arms out to the side ready to catch you, because we've seen people that say they have good balance and next thing you know they shut their eyes and they fall really fast one particular direction. So we don't want anybody getting hurt. So that's, let me back up here. So we should be able to do that 30 seconds in each of those activities. So if that's the case, we do that well, then we proceed to standing on one leg. Now this is important. We don't want to stand like this woman is standing right here in this yoga pose that she's doing, because now the brain is getting feedback with that leg that's up being on the other leg. So what we want to do is stand on one leg with the opposite knee bent and the foot at the level of the ankle. So basically we can go up to the knee if we want, but generally speaking we can hold that foot at the level of the ankle just off the floor, and it should not be touching the other leg. Now people should be able to stand 30 seconds on one leg just fine. And you'd be surprised how many people have trouble doing this type of activity, let alone trying it with their eyes closed. I'm not recommending at all during this particular session or application section of this webinar. I don't recommend anybody doing this one with the eyes closed, because you need somebody who can be there to spot you or catch you doing that. So you want to stand one leg, other knee bent, that foot at the level of the ankle, and then you want to try to do that for 30 seconds and perform on the opposite leg. And then also too, another variation on this which can be difficult for people is the tandem stand. So that's one foot in front of the other. Can you do that one way and then the other way for 30 seconds each? So this just tells us this is a general what we would call a bedside screen. Something we can do anywhere at any time to get a general idea if somebody's having some type of dysfunction in their balance system. That can be an indication or a red flag of dysfunction with their cognitive abilities. So cognitive testing. This is something that is not readily accessible to the average person, or the lay person, I should say, because what happens is these are very involved tests that really require a great deal of calculation and analysis. So you need qualified individuals that can analyze these tests appropriately to deliver an appropriate rendering or assessment of the information. So there's many ways these tests can be interpreted, but by and large you need somebody who is equipped and capable of doing that. There are many different types of providers that do these tests: psychologists, neuropsychologists, neurologists, some some medical doctors, functional neurologists like the chiropractic neurologists, and many others. So there are ways to not have to get into extensive involved testing. Now, we refer people out all the time for extreme batteries of cognitive tests, but for our purposes within our facility, these general kind of half-hour screens that tell us about aspects of memory, attention, reaction time, etc., can give us a great deal of information to tell us if we need to go a step further. So these are really good entry-level tests, really quite cost-effective, and for these can be done for the most part in people that don't have significant cognitive impairment. They can be done remotely or from a distance. So they can be done at somebody's computer in their own home, and then they can be reviewed via distance as well. So if anybody has an interest in this type of thing, you can just simply call Apex Brain Centers at 828-708-5274, and this type of testing can be arranged. We have to be careful with the amount of calls and tests that are being requested, because it simply could overwhelm us and overload us. So if that is the case, then we will simply put a notification out that we can't do them anymore. But as it stands right now, we can tolerate a fair capacity. So if you have an interest in doing that, simply call the office. Okay, optimization actions. We're at the end of session 2, part 2. So our optimization actions, what are we going to take with us? What are we going to implement into our lives this week that is going to make an impact on our brain and body health? This is the cool part. This is where we get to do things every week. We're going to get a few of these tips, and we're going to really start to build up an arsenal or a toolbox that will be at our disposal to really help push our brain in the right direction. And we'll have an ongoing list of these optimization tips separate to these webinars in the member section, just so that you have a quick review on those at a glance. Number 1. Going back to smell, rosemary oil. We talked about rosemary having impacts on memory as great as 75% improvement in certain studies. So this is really significant. So you can use this as an assist, or as a daily intervention to help boost your brain function. So what you do is you simply take some rosemary oil. You can get some essential oils at any health food store or various outlets online, and you basically apply under the nostrils and even on the wrist creases, because some of this will penetrate into the body, but under the nostrils we'll get that direct smell stimulation into the brain, and you simply replenish as needed daily, maybe 2 or 3 times a day. Even when you don't smell it anymore, you're still getting that stimulation. Your body will accommodate, or your brain will accommodate or attenuate, and basically start to block out some of that stimulation when it's been there for a while, but you're still getting it. And as you do these things, you may find that those smell tests will improve. So if you couldn't smell up until about 2 inches from your nose, as you do these types of interventions, eventually you might be able to get to 4 inches and 5 inches and 6 inches away from the nose and become more accurate. But it does help enhance learning. There are plenty of studies now to back up rosemary's ability to enhance learning. And what you can do also too is just grow your own, cut it often, put it around the house in various places, put it in water so it doesn't dry out quick. And when it does dry, just use it for some spices in your foods. Rosemary is a great addition to any meal. Sit to stand exercise. We know the sit to stand assessment. Now we have the sit to stand exercise. So you want to take 30 seconds and see how many times you can get up and down from a chair like we talked about. So that sit to stand test, we want to do the same thing, getting up and down in a controlled manner. So we don't want this to be super fast up and down. We want it to be controlled and smooth. See how many times you can do this in 30 seconds, and then you want to go ahead and do it twice a day to improve your scores over time. And they will improve, particularly if you have deficits. And again, do this in a safe environment. If you do have challenges with this particular test, you want to make sure you can possibly start it on a bed, so that if you do fall, you fall back onto the bed. But you want to have this in a controlled environment, or have somebody there with you as you do this to spot you. Number 3, baseline laboratory testing. So we need to understand, and there are hundreds and hundreds of tests that can be run to tell us about your brain and body and give us biomarkers of function. But for now, leading into next week, we want to understand what our values for blood sugar handling are. And these are just 2 basic values of blood sugar handling. One is your fasting blood glucose levels, and the other is your hemoglobin A1C or HbA1c levels. The fasting blood glucose is a snapshot in time, so it tells you exactly where you're at that particular time. The hemoglobin A1C is a longer marker, roughly about a 90-day marker of blood sugar handling that can tell us a bit more as to whether you're dealing with a diabetic or pre-diabetic state. So you want to get these numbers as a baseline, particularly if you hadn't had any lab work in a number of years, as many people we see the case with these days. So get these measured, and what we're going to do is next week we're going to look into that very topic. So that's why it's leading into this topic of blood sugar and your brain. The greatest challenge to memory is well within your control. So blood sugar in your brain, one of the most important topics I speak on. I talk about this everywhere I go. I talk about this in my podcasting and my webinars and my classes. I talk about it every day in my clinic, because what happens is if you are not handling blood sugar well or getting the appropriate gas in the tank, so to speak, your brain will never work at its highest level. So such an important topic. We're really going to try to give you as much information as we can in that short period of time. Again, understanding this is the basics of building a better brain here, but I think you're really getting a good, solid, kind of mid to lower high level understanding of what these topics are about, much more than the average person has, because again, a lot of people don't necessarily put these things together. They don't necessarily put together that their blood sugar has anything to do with their brain, or their balance has anything to do with their brain. So hopefully we're starting to get an understanding, even in this short period of time together, that there is so much we can look at to help our brains and our bodies move in the positive direction and serve us very well through the rest of our lives. So I look forward to seeing you next week for blood sugar in your brain. The greatest challenge to memory is well within your control. Take care, and we'll see you then.